This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. North Korea test fires multiple ballistic missiles and says on the eve of the U.S. presidential election that military drills by its rivals justify Pyongyang's nuclear reinforcement. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in a final sprint for the White House, with China and the rest of Asia watching closely. A win for either candidate could reshape America's approach to this region. And Li Qiang says that he is fully confident that China will hit its economic targets this year. The premier praising recent stimulus moves and hinting there's room for even more. Nintendo downgrades its annual sales forecast after first half profit plunges 60% as it keeps fans and investors in the dark about its next generation console. And ahead on East Asia tonight, Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing heads to China for a regional conference in what is his first trip to the country since taking power in the 2021 coup. Our correspondent unpacks the purpose and meaning behind this trip. North Korea has fired another barrage of ballistic missiles into the sea hours before polls open in the U.S. presidential election. Well, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff says that Pyongyang fired at least 7 short-range missiles towards its eastern sea earlier this morning. The missiles flew about 400 kilometers before landing outside Japan's exclusive economic zone in the ocean. Both Tokyo and Seoul condemned the move. Well, Tuesday's launch came just 5 days after North Korean leader Kim Jong-un supervised a flight test of the country's newest intercontinental ballistic missile, capable of hitting anywhere in the United States. Seoul has demanded Pyongyang to end its illegal provocations.
북한은 비열한 우물 쓰레기 풍선 살포와 GPS 교란 등으로 우리 국민의 안전을 위협해 왔습니다. 또한 북한은 경의선과 동해선 남북 연결교로 폭파 쇼를 벌여 국제사회로부터 고립을 자초하면서 스스로를 혹독한 수용소로 만들고 있습니다. 특히 최근 ICBM 발사에 이어 오늘도 단거리 탄도미사일 수발을 발사하는 등 불법적인 도발을 지속 획책하고 있습니다.
これまでの弾道ミサイル等の度重なる発射も含め、一連の北朝鮮の行動は我が国、地域及び国際社会の平和と安全を脅かすものであり、断じて容認できないと考えております。
North Korea was expected to dial up its military activity near the U.S. presidential election. The U.S. military says that while the launches do not pose an immediate threat to U.S. personnel or territory, it's closely consulting with South Korea, Japan, and other regional allies. Meantime, North Korea's state media KCNA earlier reported that Kim Yo-jong, the sister of leader Kim Jong-un, justified the North's nuclear reinforcement following joint military drills by the U.S., Japan, and South Korea. Russia also says that Pyongyang's tests were a justified security measure in response to what it called U.S. provocations. The first votes on election day have been cast in the United States, an election that could change how the superpower deals with China and its allies in Asia. Well, South Korea is among those watching the results closely as it leans on Washington to defend itself against threats from North Korea. Well, CNA's senior Korea correspondent Lim Yun-suk tells us more.
2 Apache helicopter gunships, armed and ready, circle a firing range about 26 kilometers from the demilitarized zone separating South and North Korea. This was part of live fire exercises last week between the U.S. and the South, officially known as the Republic of Korea, or ROK.
The purpose of today's exercise is to test the combat readiness not only of U.S. aviation but also the ROK aviation and how we partner together. We're ready to go right now. We train to be ready to fight tonight, and I'm sure our ROK partners are as well.
But the moves usually spark a fiery response from North Korea. Since 2022, Pyongyang has test launched more than 100 missiles, saying they were in response to the drills, which Seoul and Washington conduct regularly. Both sides established a military alliance 71 years ago. Experts in Seoul believe the partnership will be unshaken, no matter who becomes the next U.S. president, though pressure on South Korea to fulfill certain responsibilities might change.
해리스 현 부통령이 당선이 될 경우에 기본적인 딜레마는 똑같다고 봐요. 한국의 역할이 단순히 한반도 전쟁의 억제라든가 방어 같은 차원을 넘어서서 더 넓은 지역적인 차원의 역할을 해야 된다라는 것은 아마 요구하는 강도의 차이일 뿐이지 이 해리스 바이든 정부나 트럼프 정부의 공통된 요구 사항이었기 때문에
The U.S. will request South Korea to be gearing towards more on deterring China rather than North Korea. But as we know, in the Pacific, the threats are pretty much intertwined. It doesn't mean that if something happens in Taiwan, it will be something that is only confined to Taiwan. It will have an impact on the Japanese island and Korean peninsula, and North Korea will jump in.
And that could include expectations on South Korea to pay more to host some 28,500 American troops currently based here. The two sides have agreed that Seoul will pay $1.1 billion in 2026 when a new 5-year defense cost-sharing deal kicks in. And that's an increase of 8.3% from 2025. But analysts say it's very possible that if Donald Trump returns to office, he would scrap this deal and demand more. He has said he would seek as much as $10 billion.
재협상을 요구할 가능성도 있기 때문에 여기에 대한 고민이 깊어질 수밖에 없죠. 트럼프 전 대통령이 얘기한 수준까지는 아니겠지만 기존에 비해서 파격적인 증액을 약속을 하는 대신 우리가 비용을 댄 만큼 북한 핵기업에 대한 보장은 확실하게 해달라는 요구를 할 수가 있을 거고 그렇게 될 경우에 오히려 이 경제적 이익을 중요시하는 트럼프 행정부에서는 또 거꾸로 협상이 더 쉬울 수도 있지 않나 하는 생각도 분명히 할 수가 있는 거거든요.
But no matter the outcome of negotiations, analysts believe it's unlikely Trump, if elected, will pull out troops from South Korea, which he had previously threatened to do so. They're also optimistic that trilateral cooperation among the U.S., South Korea, and Japan will continue.
Even during the first Trump government, U.S. tried a lot to bring up and restore the relationship between Japan and Korea and make a trilateral cooperation. What I worry about is if Trump requests a lot of burden sharing and put tariff on Japan and South Korea, I'm not sure how South Korean government, Japanese government are willing to cooperate on trilateral format.
For all these reasons, analysts say North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, too, will be watching the election results closely. But like South Korea, they say, it's hard to tell if a victory by Kamala Harris or Trump will be better for North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. Since President Yoon Suk-yeol took office, South Korea has moved closer to the United States while holding China at arm's length. Analysts say North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia has complicated issues for South Korea. It remains to be seen how President Yoon will work with the new U.S. administration to deter threats from North Korea and tackle the issue of North Korean soldiers in Russia. Lim Yan-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Well, we've also asked experts who China and its neighbours want to see holding America's top office.
Whether it's Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, there's consensus that competition with China is here to stay.
The U.S. policy toward China has changed, like a big ship has changed its course. It's very difficult to turn back. And at the moment, in the U.S., the policy community is not debating whether we should be tough with China. Okay? They are debating on how to be tough with China.
Mr. Trump set tariffs on China in 2018. They continued under President Joe Biden.
A 100% tariff on electric vehicles made in China. People say, wow.
A move supported by Ms. Harris. But there's a difference.
While Harris has talked about tariffs on China. Trump has, in addition, talked about putting 10 or even 20% tariffs more broadly on all countries, right, which would have pretty significant effects on their economies and on just the general stability of the international trading system.
Ms. Harris offers continuity, while Mr. Trump, experts say, is an agent of unpredictability, if not chaos.
To me, China has a clear preference now because of the personality of the candidates. Trump is very different from a normal Republican candidate. He's quite emotional, quite unpredictable. His first administration performance demonstrates he can be quite unethical, okay, in terms of pursuing his goals.
The unpredictability extends to sensitive issues like Taiwan.
You know, uncertainty itself can be dangerous, right? Uncertainty can cause miscalculation. Uncertainty can cause countries to engage in hedging behaviors, and all of those things can be destabilizing.
Countries that were able to carve out good relations with the US under former President Trump, like Japan, may be able to do it again. But many believe the first Trump presidency is an imperfect guide.
Some of these more extreme tendencies of Donald Trump might be amplified in a second administration. He's not running for re-election. He's, probably getting older and more impatient. And so having heard a lot of reasons for stability during his first term, I think he might be more willing to be more adventurous, maybe more reckless, more cavalier in his foreign policy.
It's likely to be a rougher ride under Trump. But analysts also agree the ties that bind the US and Asia are strong enough to weather the outcome, whoever wins. Tan Chiu-yi, CNA, Singapore.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, we delve into the final pitches of the US presidential candidates. And the first results are out. The resort town at Dixville Notch is the first to finish their vote count. We'll tell you who they chose. Polls have opened in the American state of Vermont as those who haven't voted early start heading out to cast their ballots. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump made their final pitches on the eve of Election Day. And according to surveys, months of campaigning have failed to significantly move the needle. And with the country still divided right down the middle. The race is likely to be decided by the outcome in 7 too-close-to-call swing states. And that's where the White House hopefuls have chosen to end their campaigns. Vice President Kamala Harris wrapping things up in the swing state with the most electoral votes, Pennsylvania. She told the crowd in Philadelphia that momentum is on their side.
Because when you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for.
Ms. Harris staged her final rally at the steps made famous in the movie Rocky, calling herself the underdog who's ready to climb to victory. And she promised to turn the page on the politics of hate and division and reiterated her promises to lower the cost of living, housing, childcare, and elderly home care. She also vowed to pass a bill to restore a woman's right to have an abortion after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Well, the vice president was joined by celebrities, including Oprah Winfrey and Lady Gaga. Former President Donald Trump vows to lead the U.S. to new heights of glory as he delivers his final campaign speech in the swing state of Michigan. Well, the late-night turned early morning rally ushers in Election Day, with Mr. Trump assuring his supporters of a landslide win, while also accusing the Democrats of election fraud.
Who's going to approve open borders with criminals pouring into our country by the millions? No, they have to cheat. They have to cheat, and they do it very well, actually. But I think we're in very good shape. We just have to you show up, and you're going to have the biggest victory. You know what this will be? the single greatest victory, politically speaking, in the history of our country.
Earlier, Mr. Trump made a stop in Pennsylvania's Pittsburgh, where he promised stronger border controls and a better economy, saying that Ms. Harris would bring economic misery if she's elected. He also vowed to move quickly to crack down on drug trafficking along the southern U.S. border with Mexico, using tariffs, claiming he would do the same for China. And the first results are out. The count took just 15 minutes after the 6 residents of the tiny New Hampshire resort town, Dixville Notch, cast their ballots at the stroke of midnight. The vote was evenly split between Trump and Harris, reflecting a race for the White House that couldn't be any closer. Benji Haya recounts the lead up to Election Day.
Assassination attempts.
Nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy.
A change at the top of the ticket.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation.
This has been a quite unbelievable few months in US politics.
I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Finally, it's here. Election day itself. America's reached the crossroads. Now it chooses which path to go down.
Each of you has the power to turn the page and start writing the next chapter in the most extraordinary story ever told. I thank you all.
Right up to the finish line, this race has been too close to call. At a rally, a major one here in the nation's capital, the Vice President's closing address. She tried to forge a gap between her and Donald Trump in their character, in their vision for the country.
And Kamala, but doesn't lie as much.
The Vice President's message of unity, a stark contrast to the former president's rhetoric in these final days of the campaign, doubling down on his threats towards his political opponents, towards immigrants, and attacking Harris's intelligence.
She's a very low IQ individual. She's dumb as a rock, and you can't have that. You can't have that.
The candidates could not be further apart in personality or on many matters of policy, and yet, even in the eyes of the most renowned pollsters, very little separates them.
I have no idea what's going to happen. Let me just cut right any suspense that there may be. And anybody who does say that they know what's going to happen really is lying. This race is tied.
This contest could be decided by the barest of margins, a handful of voters in a handful of battleground states.
Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, early votes are very heavily tilted towards women. And if that continues, that's very positive for Harris.
Tens of millions of people have already cast their ballot. Those will take days to count. We may not know the next White House resident for some time. And if precedent is anything to go by, one candidate in particular is likely to challenge the result, even if they lose fair and square. The outcome, either way, will have reverberations far beyond these shores. America, the world, braces itself to see in which direction this shining city on a hill might turn. Benji Haya, CNA, Washington.
Turning back to Asia, Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing is set to attend a Mekong summit in China's Kunming, and it's his first trip to the country since the coup in 2021. Among those at the regional meetings, Chinese Premier Li Qiang, as well as leaders from Thailand, Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. Well, the Army Chief's trip comes as clashes continue to flare up near the borders of both countries. Just last week, China troops reportedly fired warning shots at a Myanmar aircraft flying too close to its territory. China's consulate in Mandalay was also recently targeted by explosive devices. There were no casualties apart from minor damage to the building. Well, despite that, China has maintained diplomatic ties with Myanmar, including holding regular meetings with the military. In August, Senior General Min Aung Hlaing met China's top diplomat Wang Yi in Naypyidaw. Myanmar's opposition, the National Unity Government, has said it's unhappy and shocked by China's invitation. Well, for more on this, we are joined now by our ASEAN and Myanmar correspondent, Leong Wai-kit. Wai-kit, first up, perhaps you can help unpack this visit for us and talk about the dynamics between China and Myanmar at this stage.
Right, Otelli. If you recall, back then in July, I had first spoken about Min Aung Hlaing's visit to China. Back then, my sources told me that the only time that China would invite Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing to China would be when it is satisfied that Myanmar has a solid plan to bring the country back to normalcy. And since July and now, several things have transpired. You mentioned earlier, Otelli, that there was a meeting between Wang Yi and Min Aung Hlaing in Myanmar. Shortly after that, China came up to publicly support Myanmar when it comes to holding elections. Now, my sources tell me that the Myanmar Army's election plan involves holding polls in various phases. The first phase would involve holding polls in areas where the junta has full control over those townships, and subsequently other townships in other time frames. Now, if you look at this as a background and take a step back, what this tells me about China is that where China's economic and security interests are at stake, China will act. And when China does act, it's likely to have an influence over Myanmar. I mean, if you look at recent cases, China has been successful in calling for peace talks and ceasefires at the borders between the Myanmar army as well as ethnic armies. And this time round, it's invited Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing because sources say that China is satisfied with the transition plan. If you look at Myanmar's point of view, Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing is likely to sell the message to say that he's legitimate, that he has gone to Russia as a leader, he's now in China as a leader, and is likely to send this message to two camps. First, on the national level, telling leaders, nations that he is legitimate and therefore should be engaged. On a lower level, he's likely to be selling this as a warning to his opposition resistance forces that if you continue to fight me, he has the backing of China. And this is the biggest proof that China is backing Beijing. China is backing Myanmar. But whether or not Min Aung Hlaing is really in China to walk the red carpet and receive welcome from China remains to be seen, because we may have a situation where China officials continue to pressure and ask for more from Min Aung Hlaing. So that remains to be seen.
So, Wai-kit, we know that China's got a pretty big influence on Myanmar. But, you know, as we're talking, there's still this ongoing crisis in Myanmar. So how would this trip impact the outcome of that?
I think it will impact the outcome in a diplomatic way. Many of these countries in Kunming right now are ASEAN member states. Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, and now with Myanmar in the mix, it's half of ASEAN. Interestingly, these four ASEAN member states are kinder, more tolerant and friendlier to the Myanmar junta as opposed to other member states like Indonesia and Singapore. So it's very likely that the ASEAN member states will take this opportunity to talk to Min Aung Hlaing to see whether or not he is keen to take part in informal talks that will be held in Bangkok in December. Now, back then, my army sources say that the army has still not received an invite to that informal talks that will be held in Bangkok. Now, the other thing is that now that Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing has gotten a taste of diplomatic engagements with other leaders, he's likely to want to seek more interaction with other ASEAN member states, or even more ambitiously get a seat back at the ASEAN meetings next year.
And many thanks for that report. CNA's ASEAN and Myanmar correspondent, Leong Wai-kit. All right, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, Chinese state-sponsored hackers accused of breaching Singapore's largest mobile carrier. And striking workers at Boeing approve a new labor deal ending 8 weeks of industrial action that has paralyzed the plane maker. Thanks for your company on East Asia tonight. North Korea test fires multiple ballistic missiles and says on the eve of the U.S. presidential election that military drills by its rivals justify Pyongyang's nuclear reinforcement. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump in a final sprint for the White House, with China and the rest of Asia watching closely. A win for either candidate could reshape America's approach to the region. And Chinese Premier Li Qiang says he is fully confident China will hit its economic targets this year, while praising recent stimulus moves and hinting there is room for even more. So, Roland, Mr. Lee, Premier Lee, giving that rather upbeat assessment at a key event in Shanghai. Tell us more about that.
Thanks for telling. Yes, Premier Lee was speaking at the 7th China International Import Expo. His presence itself a show of China's commitment to opening up its markets. Now, nearly 3,500 exhibitors from 129 countries are gathered in Shanghai for the event. CNA's Tan Yu-Guan with this report.
Premier Li Qiang's speech was about 16 minutes, but he devoted quite a bit of it to talk about the backlash against globalization and China's commitment to open up its markets. He pointed out that China has fulfilled and exceeded its commitments to the World Trade Organization by lowering its import tariffs to 7.3%, lower than the 9.8% target. On the other hand, although he did not name names, he condemned what he calls dishonest actions by some in carrying out their commitments to open up their markets.
种种不讲信誉的行为，造成了毁坏规则的破窗效应。只有各方都坚守开放承诺，拿出务实的行动，才能携手营造良好的开放合作环境，才能让开放真正成为普遍共识，化作内在自觉。我们应共同遵守国际经贸秩序规则，切实履行签署的多双边经贸协定，让各方能够更加积极、主动、坚定地开放合作。
Addressing the opening session, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim shared the same sentiment, stressing that multi-country cooperation should not be weaponized.
So multi-country cooperation for free trade and sustainability goals must be used as a tool to advance global progress equitably instead of as a weapon to quell competition, promote unfair advantage, or create conflict.
Mr. Anwar is in China for a 4-day working visit at the invitation of Premier Li. The 6-day CIIE event brings together thousands of foreign exhibitors from over 120 countries, keen to expand their share of the vast Chinese market. The Import Expo comes as China's trade surplus with the world continues to creep up, thanks to robust exports. Last year, China's exports to the world exceeded imports by over $800 billion. 300 billion of that trade surplus is with its largest trading partner, the United States, making it a source of trade tensions between the two countries. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
Now, Premier Li Qiang's optimistic outlook at the China International Import Expo helping to boost market sentiment. Greater China markets closed with robust gains. Shanghai Composite climbing to a 4-week high, adding 2.3%. The second bourse, Shenzhen, advancing 3.2%. And the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong, its best showing in 3 weeks. Mr. Li is confident that China will hit this year's growth target of around 5%. And he says economic developments point to a favorable outlook and that China has both fiscal and monetary tools at its disposal to shore up further growth. He's pledged to further open up the telecommunications, internet and healthcare sectors for investment to aid China's recovery. Markets are also digesting a strong improvement in service sector activity in October as the impact of Beijing's stimulus packages take shape. A private gauge of the service sector activity edged up to 52 last month, exceeding analyst expectations. Remember, reading above 50 suggests growth. Our Chinese markets are keeping an eye on potential stimulus announcement from China's top legislative body as they meet this week in Beijing. Japanese gaming giant Nintendo has slashed its annual sales forecast for the Switch console after disappointing first-half results. A net profit dropped 60% from a year earlier to $710 million for the 6 months ended September, while the revenue declined more than 34% to around $3.4 billion. The company says it now expects to sell 12.5 million units of Switch for its fiscal year ending March of 2025. And that is down by 1 million from a previous forecast. The gaming giant has also lowered its full fiscal year forecast for sales and operating profit. Now, Nintendo has been grappling with falling demand for its iconic Switch console, which is now more than 7 years old. Investors are anticipating news of a successor to Switch, which Nintendo has previously said will be announced in March of 2025. Shares of the Kyoto-based company have risen around 6.7% this year, underperforming the Nikkei stock average 15% gain, as it keeps fans and investors in the dark about its next-generation console. They closed around 4% in the red ahead of the earnings call. Taiwan's soaring energy costs and growing outage risks are hitting its companies, including semiconductor giant TSMC. The chip maker, which operates plants in the US, Japan, and is building one in Germany, now expects to pay more for power in Taiwan than all the other regions it operates in. Supplying some of the world's cheapest power had long been one of Taiwan's strengths, but subsidizing energy costs has become unsustainable as a surge in global fossil fuel prices and insufficient alternative power sources have saddled state-owned utility Taiwan Power Company with heavy losses. Now, Taipei has raised electricity prices 4 times since 2022. The biggest industrial users, including TSMC, suffering a 25% increase. The price jumps are part of a broader energy problem for Taiwan's industry. Now, some experts expect shortfalls in electricity supply to inhibit the expansion of TSMC's chip production in Taiwan. Energy demand is skyrocketing for production of its most advanced semiconductors, with power requirements almost doubling from 2 generations earlier. Unpredictable and abrupt price surges could also deter global investors seeking to maintain or grow their operations in Taiwan. Striking workers at Boeing have ratified a new labor deal, ending a paralyzing strike nearly 8 weeks and clearing the way for the plane maker to restart its factories. The machinists' union rejected 2 prior offers, but now have voted in favor of a new contract that delivers a 38% wage increase spread over 4 years. The latest offer was approved by 59% of union members. The move will send some 33,000 Seattle area workers back on the job and to restore operations at 2 major assembly plants from tomorrow. This was the first strike in 16 years by Boeing's largest union. The plane maker has lurched from one setback to the next since a door panel blew off a 737 MAX plane in midair in January. The walkout has strained Boeing's finances. It has warned investors that it expects to remain cash flow negative in 2025 after burning through more than $10 billion in the first 9 months of this year. And Boeing's stock price is currently up more than 2% in pre-market trading. Singapore's largest mobile carrier, Singtel, says that its cyber defenses are being constantly probed, just like any other key infrastructure service provider. It was responding to a Bloomberg report that Chinese state-sponsored hackers had breached the telco in June. A Singtel spokesperson says its cyber defenses had picked up the malware and eradicated it, and it reported the breach to relevant authorities. Singtel says that it reviews its cybersecurity capabilities regularly to protect its assets from evolving threats. According to Bloomberg, the breach is part of a broader campaign against telco companies and other critical infrastructure operators around the world. Now, experts believe hacking group Volt Typhoon pulled off the Singtel breach. An intelligence sharing alliance had warned that the group was doing this to give China the ability to conduct cyber attacks. Now, Singtel's breach was seen as a test run for further hacks against U.S. telco companies. And that'll do it for the business news. I'll tell you.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia tonight, a tight race for the White House. What the outcome may mean for Southeast Asia's biggest exporter, Vietnam. Plus, our correspondents tell us how firms and countries elsewhere in the region will likely be coping. Vietnam is among several Southeast Asian countries that have benefited from the ongoing U.S.-China trade war. Well, the country has seen a surge in foreign investments as more companies seeking to avoid U.S. tariffs on goods from China chose to relocate there. Now, with the U.S. set to have a new president, can Vietnam maintain its winning streak? Well, CNA's Tong No finds out.
This factory in Vietnam's northern Bắc Ninh province counts U.S. EV giant Tesla among its customers.
Body, close here.
Angel Su and her husband founded the company behind it in China's manufacturing capital Shenzhen 20 years ago, first serving the local market.
We can product the phone, like phone we can product. Yeah.
As China grew to become the factory of the world, American companies are now its major customers.
For our industry, because of the tariff, because of the China and the U.S. the relationship, right? It's not good. Now it's right. Because of the tariff, U.S. customer ask IB need to transfer a lot of country do the product. First, in 2019, we think about which country is better. Then we choose Vietnam, because Vietnam is close to China. Our customer, the tariff is U.S. customer is 25%, so we can save for 25% cost for customer. Yeah, so why the customer push IB quickly transfer from China to here very quickly. So we about 6 months we transfer now 70% product already transfer here.
Although the net savings are actually lower. Due to Vietnam's nascent supporting industry, the production time is 2 weeks longer here compared to its factory in China. Also, there's an additional 5% shipping cost. And the factory here does not fully protect it from the risks of further escalations in the trade war, which analysts expect will continue regardless of who wins the November 5th election.
We also are very worried about China and the U.S. Yeah, our is business people, right? So we need to think about in the future, China and U.S., then Vietnam. Many Chinese companies come Vietnam, maybe in the future or have the tariff. Vietnam. So this so very worried about this. Yeah. So why we need to have a facility in U.S.
Despite the uncertainties, the company said it expects to double its Vietnam workforce soon from about 700 currently. Analysts said evading tariffs is just one of many reasons why more foreign companies, especially those from China, move to set up production facilities in Vietnam.
I would think it would accelerate because you still have those two dynamics, the cost, wage growth in Vietnam and factory wage growth in Vietnam and factory wage growth in China are fairly comparable. But increasingly, there's a third factor that we can think about now, which is the efforts of China to focus on higher value-added products, manufacture put more value added to their manufacturing, and therefore, since Vietnam is more focused on the assembly part of the manufacturing process, I think you could think about a third motivation for the Chinese manufacturers, to move their factories here, which is that everything in China is going more up the value chain now.
And with the U.S.-China trade war expected to further disrupt global supply chain, Vietnam wants to make sure it stays as a winner. Vietnam's top leaders in recent speeches talked about the country's determination to speed up reforms, pledging to create a competitive business environment by streamlining administrative procedures and promoting sustainable practices, among other things. Tung Ngo, CNA, Hanoi.
Well, colleagues at CNA Digital have also looked into this phenomenon of companies relocating out of China to other countries apart from Vietnam across Southeast Asia to avoid U.S. tariffs against Beijing. Now, there is also concern that levies may be imposed by Washington against firms who make that shift. Well, joining us now, we have Amir Yusuf from CNA Digital. He is the lead writer of that report, as well as our CNA TV's Shenzhen correspondent, Deborah Wong. Now, Amir is joining us from Johor Bahru, and Deborah is in Hong Kong. Well, let's just start things off with you first, Amir. We just saw from that story that companies are flocking to Vietnam because of this U.S.-China trade war, and you have written about it extensively. Your research also covered other Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia, and you've sort of come to that conclusion that whether it's Harris or Trump, it does not change the tide. Why is that?
Yes, indeed, Oteli. So Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia have benefited from this China plus one strategy. It's a policy Beijing has put in place to diversify their supply chains and avoid US tariffs on goods from China. So this has given a rise to the phenomenon of Southeast Asia washing, a phenomenon of Chinese companies trying to disguise the origin of their products by relocating operations to countries in the region. Now, the US has started to become aware of this and started imposing tariffs. For instance, they imposed duties on solar imports from these countries in October. Analysts I spoke to said both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are likely to continue imposing tariffs on these countries, but they stress that under a Trump administration, measures are likely to be even more aggressive because Trump is obsessive imposing tariffs, especially on countries with whom the US has a trade deficit.
Amir, Southeast Asia washing, that's a really interesting topic to discuss. I want to bring you in now, Deborah, because yesterday we actually just talked about some of the alternatives that companies in China have been looking at. Amir and his colleagues in their story have also focused quite a bit on the solar industry in Malaysia as well as its challenges. But I'm curious to know from China's perspective, Deborah, how do authorities or companies see these moves? I mean, what is the thinking behind their strategy?
Well, observers have called this entire phenomenon a huge cat and mouse game. You know, when one export hub experiences challenges in one area, another one pops up elsewhere. And if we were to use the same example of Chinese solar panel firms that Amir brought up in his story, we see them starting to explore alternative places like in Laos and Indonesia. So Chinese companies, they want to keep supplying to the lucrative US market. So the shift in production has been quite quick. You know, in August, solar exports from Indonesia to the US actually doubled, whereas in export shipments from Laos to the US, it went up 7 times from its entire 2023 figure. So that really shows that Chinese companies are keen to portray the image that it wants to maintain business as usual. And Chinese authorities, on the other hand, they know that there's an urgent need to diversify. In fact, it's urged Chinese EV makers to go global, to set up manufacturing bases to circumvent US tariffs. And on the broader front, this is really reflective of China's desire to deepen ties with the global South. You know, we're seeing it continue to deepen investments, infrastructure investments in developing countries like in Indonesia. In fact, President Xi Jinping will be meeting the newly minted Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto in a few days. And leaders will also be meeting the Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim sometime this week. So it's really all part of China's push to build and strengthen international alliances, especially as it tries to fend off tensions from the West. So that's what Chinese companies are hoping to achieve. That's what China's hoping to achieve. My question now for Amir is, you know, we've seen in your report that it's not smooth sailing for the Chinese companies based there. What's your take on it?
Yes, Deborah, it's really been a rough ride, especially recently. In Malaysia, there are already reports of Chinese solar plants halting operations, stalling expansion plans. A local official at one industrial facility in Kedah told us that Chinese solar firm Ryzen Technology has already reduced production output by ceasing one line of production. Jinko Solar, a major player here, has shut its Penang facility and retrenched workers there. So there are concerns also over spillover effects into the other industries like semiconductor and also data centers, 2 areas which has perhaps seen a lot of growth in Malaysia recently. So if more tariffs are implemented, we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars lost investments to Malaysia's economy and thousands of jobs lost.
All right, certainly it's been a bumpy ride for these firms from the sound of it. Well, we know that the Malaysian Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, he's in China this week, and I'm just wondering if you think this issue would come up. What's your take on it? Let's start with you, Deborah, and then Amir.
Well, I think it could come up, especially since just in September we saw Chinese President Xi Jinping. He had a meeting with Malaysia's King Sultan Ibrahim, and during that meeting they actually talked about a deepening collaboration on high-tech modernization. So whether that could come in the form of state funds to support these struggling companies, we don't know yet. But what's for certain is that China recognizes that Malaysia is a key partner in its Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, there could be plans for Malaysia's East Coast Rail Link project to connect to a pan-Asian rail network that could go all the way to China. So both countries are this year marking 50 years of diplomatic ties, and Malaysia will also ASEAN next year. And China does need a friendly face in its corner, especially as it continues to navigate the very complex South China Sea issue. Amir.
Yes, I agree with Deborah. I think there's a good chance the two leaders will discuss this issue. The Malaysian government told us last week that they're negotiating the US Commerce Department for more time and to lend support to Chinese companies in Malaysia. So this issue is clearly among Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's priority. PM Anwar might look to President Xi to smoothen things out with Washington and hopefully achieve a win-win outcome for both Beijing and Putrajaya with regards to this issue. Beyond this, Prime Minister Anwar is also likely to invite President Xi to attend the ASEAN summit next year, as China continues to be an important partner for ASEAN.
All right, we'll be looking out for that. Thank you so very much. CNA Digital's Amir Yusuf and our correspondent Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. And do keep with us right here on CNA TV as we bring you live coverage and analysis of the U.S. presidential and congressional polls tomorrow from 7 a.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. And you can also tune into our special show, U.S. Votes 2024, as Americans choose their next president. Our correspondents in the U.S. will take us across battleground states. Caroline Malone will be in the swing state of Pennsylvania. Tony Waterman, Mitch McCann, and Benji Hire will also be keeping us updated from Arizona, Michigan, Washington, D.C. And also bringing the Asian perspective, our correspondents from China, Japan, South Korea, India, Malaysia, Philippines, and Singapore will be taking us through all the implications of this high-stakes vote for the region. And that wraps up East Asia tonight, this Tuesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. And you can always look us up, Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Thanks for watching.